Hi, welcome to another episode of The Leadership Enigma. You know that we are insatiably curious with regard to all things leaders and leadership. And especially, we have explored with so many wonderful people inclusive, human-centered leadership. And this episode is no different. Trust me, you don't want to miss this particular episode where we've got the wonderful Marc Woods with us, whose life really changed at the tender age of 17. And he'll tell you more about that story, but he went on to win 12 Paralympic medals at 5 games. But he covets his 10-meter award more than anything. Why? Don't miss this episode, and he'll tell us all.
You're listening to The Leadership Enigma, powered by Transform Performance International, a podcast for the insatiably curious to explore the power of human-centered leadership to create real momentum for positive and sustainable change. Whether you're an entrepreneur, business owner, or corporate executive, each week we speak to global experts, academics, rising stars, ambitious upstarts, and disruptors as we discover that success leaves clues. Now, here's your host, Adam Pacifico.
Well, there we go. After that introduction, Marc, it's a massive welcome to the Leadership Enigma. How are you?
I'm very good. Thank you, Adam. How are you?
Did you hear that? Success leaves clues and a better and more inclusive world. So I'm hoping that has set us up for a wonderful episode. It really has. It's great to have you on the Leadership Enigma. Now, I gave a very quick potted background of who you are. Many people may know of you, may actually recognize you, but do me a favor. Give us a little bit of a background that you want to give the listeners, because I know you've got a wonderful way of explaining how we got to this point.
Okay, so yes, you gave some information. So I'll fill in the gap. So
yeah.
So I, as a 17-year-old, I was diagnosed with a type of bone cancer called an osteosarcoma. Had it in a small bone in my foot. Meant that I had to have 6 months of chemotherapy, and I had my leg amputated below the knee. Pretty brutal experience, as I'm sure you'd imagine. And but I did have this kind of moment of inspiration when that happened, where I suddenly thought, I didn't know how long I had in my life left. I didn't know that it's going to be 6 years or 60 years or 6 months. I just really didn't, it's one of those moments in time. But I knew I wanted to make the most of the time that I did have. And I'd been a lazy county swimmer as a teenager. One of these annoying kids who thought they were great at everything, but just turned up and talked to my mates, didn't really do anything. But when I had the diagnosis, I decided that I'd like to see how good I could be at swimming. And my father started coaching me the day after I had the stitches out of my leg, still in the middle of all my chemo. And within 6 months, swimming quicker with one leg, and then before when I had two, even though I was a county standard swimmer. And then after 18 months, lucky enough to go to the Paralympic Games in Seoul. And that was the start of my Paralympic journey.
Now, Marc, I've heard that story before because I've seen some of your videos as well. And I know that is obviously part and parcel of the work that you're doing now with leaders and organizations and a lot of the inspirational talks that you're doing. But I want to go backwards, if I may, to go forwards, because you spoke very briefly about the decisions that you made at the tender age of 17. I want to know a little bit more about where did that strength and resilience come from to come to that conclusion? And did you have people around you that helped you through that? Because that's life-changing. And at 17, I remember how wise I wasn't at 17. Where did that come from, that internal strength and resilience?
Yeah, I don't know. I think teenagers can be quite robust when they're up against it. I guess my upbringing will have played into it undoubtedly. My father, he was a winchman on an air sea rescue helicopter.
Wow. Okay.
You rescue people out to sea. I only learned to swim because it was a life skill. My father was adamant that we had as kids, myself and my brother. So he was definitely a very positive person, very optimistic person. And then there was two things that happened in my head. The one was the thing that I mentioned around not knowing how long I had. Let's make the most of the time that I do have. Even though I didn't really know what I'd be capable of doing as an amputee.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm well aware of it now. But the other thing that happened was I really don't know where this came from, and I don't tend to share this with everybody, although I'm doing it on a podcast now, so therefore I am sharing it with everybody. But there was a moment where, when I first got diagnosed, I lived in a little village, and the village doctor actually came round to our house and gave me the diagnosis, and he said, you've got cancer, you're going to have your leg amputated. I said, well, what if I don't want to have my leg amputated? He says, well, you'll die. Right, okay, there's not a lot of choice there. And I was upset for about 10 minutes. It sounds silly just to say that small amount of time. I was upset for about 10 minutes. And then I suddenly thought to myself, what would I think if this was happening to somebody else at my school? Would I think, oh, that's terrible. What's for dinner? What are we doing at the weekend?
Right.
Because that's kind of how you're wired as a human being, is you look at terrible things, you might wince and think, oh, that's terrible. And then you move on to whatever else you have to do within your life. We all see terrible things happening on the news, and then we get on with the rest of our day. And I thought to myself, nobody's going to feel that sorry for me outside of my close family. I'm going to try not to feel sorry for myself. Now, where that came from, I don't know, but it was like a light bulb moment that actually stood me in really good stead for that first year of going through my chemotherapy, going through my amputation, and finding my way again.
And I know that you said before, really, there's disability in context, isn't there? And so obviously you very quickly decided on the context that you would create for yourself. Is that a fair comment, that you thought, well, this is happening to me, I'm embracing this as a fact, I will create a context, and therefore I'm in charge of the future that I have going forward?
Yeah, I mean, it's a case, you're absolutely right. This is the new reality. What am I going to do within this new reality? And the reason why I went to swimming was I was a technically good enough and strong enough swimmer to know that I could swim with one leg. That was not a difficult thing for me to do.
Right.
I didn't know what being an amputee would mean for a whole bunch of other things. How far could I walk? There was a whole bunch of things I didn't know, but the swimming was an easy one. It was, as you say, set the context. And you mentioned there that notion of contextualizing, and I'm a big believer on disability being relative to the task. I knew I wasn't going to be disabled at swimming. The world was going to class me as disabled, but I wasn't going to feel disabled at swimming, and that was important for me.
There's the phrase that you use, isn't there? That disability relevant to the task.
Yeah.
But just tell us a little bit more about that, because I think that's a powerful phrase.
Yeah.
Powerful
So
mantra.
I mean, so this came about. This phrase popped into my head because I was doing a lot of talks at schools, and I would one of the most brilliant questions I'd ever get asked was a question I get asked at primary schools, junior schools, when they'll say to you, what is it like to be disabled?
Yes.
Which is a brilliant question that only a 7-year-old will ask you.
It's that 7-year-old curiosity.
Exactly. They've got no inhibition, and it's wonderful. And I would say, well, hold on a second. Who's the most disabled person? They will say in this room, they'll say, well, you've got one leg. Fine. And who's the fastest swimmer in this room? They'll say, well, you've got a gold medal. Fine. So who's disabled at swimming, me or you?
Yeah.
And you can see all these kids go, oh my God, I'm disabled. But what I'm trying to do is to get them to understand that disability is relative to the task.
Yes.
That we're all good at some things, we're all not so good or disabled at other things. And if I can help young people and organisations start to think about judging people for the things that they can do rather than things that they can't do, the world will be a better place.
Well, I agree with you, and that really resonates with the theme really of this podcast, which has been, in some ways, it started as a selfish product, but it really is now trying to help anyone and everyone understand how do we actually move towards a better and more inclusive world. And so I hope that we can achieve that one day. Now, I noticed there's a couple of things on your desk as well. I'm interested in the little one, maybe more so than the big one, only because we've had this conversation before. But just tell the listeners, what are we looking at there? We've got two things on the desk.
So we've got two things on the desk here next to me. The larger thing is it's a BBC Sports Personality of the Year award. It's the Team Award. And I tend to joke about it because actually a lot of people got it the year that I got it, because it was given to the Olympic and Paralympic teams in 2000.
Right.
And this was, I say a lot of people, you still had to obviously go to the games.
I was going to say, there was a prerequisite, Mark.
Yeah, there was a qualification thing. So the teams did very well in Sydney off the back of what was a very poor games in Atlanta in 1996. So that's why we got the team award. And I keep that there as a instant credibility piece that I slide in and out of my camera as and when I feel as though I need it.
It's like quite iconic, isn't it, as an award?
Yes, yeah. But the thing that sits on top of it, which you referred to, is the thing that I'm really proud of. And it is my 10-meter award, my 10-meter swimming badge. And that is I can remember getting that as a 4-year-old, going to the swimming pool, my local swimming pool, and my father being standing on the side, encouraging me to. I had to do a width of the pool. It was quite a big pool. I had to do a width of the pool to get my 10 meters, and actually I got to the other end. He said, "Right now, turn around and go back." And I ended up doing double the amount. But I remember him getting me out of the pool and saying, "That is the most important thing you'll ever achieve in swimming. Right. That says that you can swim." And it really stuck in my mind, and as I mentioned, he was somebody who rescued people out of the sea. So it was a big deal for him. But he's right. It's a life skill. We live in the UK. People obviously will live all around the world as they listen to this, but the UK is an island. Yeah. We have water all around us. Everybody who lives on an island should learn to swim.
Probably worthwhile, isn't it? I mean, just in the short conversation we've had already, it sounds as if you had some very, very positive influences in your life and how you were recounting that story. I think there's an important aspect to that, isn't it? Or maybe in relation to the mindset that you were given or instilled in you at an early age, was that actually you can be and do anything you put your mind to.
Yeah. I mean, my dad was, as I say, was an optimist. I mean, occasionally too much so. I think I'd like to think that I'm a realist. What I have learned is the ability to reset. I think is probably the greatest thing. People talk about resilience, and I understand, especially now. That conversation, it feels very relevant. But resilience can lead to ill health in many ways. You can soldier on and it not be good for you. I think what I've got better at over time, and I still have to do it, is resetting. This is the new reality. I wouldn't have necessarily chosen to have this new reality, but it is what it is, and we'll work from here and try to make the best choices we can from this given point where we're at now.
Yeah, no, that really resonates. I mean, the classic, when the going gets tough, the tough get going, but then the tough burn out and are utterly exhausted. So perhaps that's not quite a compelling way forward. I want to jump forward now, Mark, because with all that you've achieved and things that you have overcome, who's Marc Woods now? Because I know you're part and parcel of Equiida, but what's the mission for you now? What gets you out of bed now with the work that you do and the people that you speak to? So tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, so that's interesting. You say what gets me out of bed, because I had to be really motivated when I was an athlete to get out of bed and go training.
Right.
And people ask me about how do you stay motivated, and I always think it's about having more than one reason to do a given thing. When I swam, I enjoyed being fit and healthy. I liked the lifestyle. I enjoyed the camaraderie of the team. I had a respect for my coach. There was lots of things that got me to swimming.
Yes.
Now, for the work that I do, so at Equiida, we're a leadership advisory business. So I tend to spend most of my time doing exec coaching, team effectiveness work, trying to get teams to function well together and achieve potential, both individually and team. And there's multiple reasons motivate me to do that as well. Of course, unlike swimming, where I earn nothing throughout my entire swimming career, there's an element of income which is important to me. I have a family and all that, which most people do have some form of overhead. But I enjoy challenging others, challenging people's preconceived ideas. And maybe we're doing a little bit of that now on this podcast. Talking about disability in a very open and frank way. I enjoy helping people achieve potential. I enjoy making a difference. I don't really enjoy work where I feel as though I'm going through the motions and the work is not achieving anything, not necessarily for me, but for somebody else. You know, I chair the Institute for Sport and Physical Activity, and I do that only because I want to make a difference in that space in terms of how sport and physical activity interact with society. So everything that I do now is about affecting change. I think if I had to try to distill it into one thing, it's either helping individuals affect change, helping teams affect change and work well together, or from a societal point of view with the voluntary stuff that I do, affecting change there.
So it's about affecting change through people, through individuals, or through teams, which brings us perhaps to the subject as well that we wanted to talk about was inclusivity. And I wanted to get your take on inclusivity, about what it means to you. What are you seeing in the work that you're doing? Because creating an inclusive world is something utterly important, but the world's gone bonkers. A lot of organizations that we're talking to now want to really drive an inclusive culture and get the benefits of that rich diversity of thought. But what is your thought in relation to inclusivity? What are you seeing at the moment? And I'm mindful when I ask that, things are slightly skewed because we've had 22 months of a global pandemic. So we've all gone through a similar experience, but it's been a deeply personal one. So I'm kind of asking you that question in that slightly odd context. But your thoughts around inclusivity and what you're seeing?
Well, it's certainly more central to the conversations I'm having with organisations, which is fantastic. So there's a high proportion of people who are interested in it. Whether we've reached a tipping point of where the majority are advocating for the minority, whatever that minority group is, I don't think so, not yet.
Right.
Certain things trigger. So there's two elements here that which I probably need to clarify, and they need to be separated out. So we're talking about inclusion. We're not talking about diversity. So I started going towards diversity there, and initially, organisations will talk about diversity. 4 or 5 years ago, if I had a conversation with the chief HR officer, they would be saying, and I would say the word diversity, they'll say, yes, we've got to get our gender sorted out. We've got to get 30%. Women. Like 30%. Why not 50%? Is my first question.
Okay.
But given that it's 50% of society, and they'd go straight to whatever their given interest was, and they'd end up going down a rabbit hole on that specific aspect of diversity. So whether it's gender, sexual orientation, ethnicity, they'd go down that rabbit hole to the exclusion of all other groups.
So blinkered.
And they would become less inclusive through that conversation on diversity, ironically enough.
Right.
So I tend to hardly ever talk about diversity. I talk about much more about inclusion, because that's where I feel as though I can help. I can help people create inclusive environments. Because without those, it doesn't matter whether you hit a quota target on a given aspect of diversity. If your organization isn't inclusive, then those people are going to leave.
Yes.
Those people, groups of society will self-deselect before they even join your organization. So in terms of inclusion, I think we are in a much better place. The conversations are being had. But I think there's still a need for action. There's still a lot of talk, as Elvis said, we need a little less conversation, a little more action, please,
Yeah.
And I think we're in that moment at a time where some people are acting, but some people still think inclusion is something that needs to be done by somebody else within their organization. Let's get a disabled person to run an inclusive workshop. Let's get somebody from the LGBTQ community. Let's get a black person. Let's get a woman. Well, I'm a white middle-aged man. I don't need to get involved. It's not my problem. Actually, no, it is. It's everybody's. Everybody needs to get involved in inclusion.
Yeah.
And that's where I think organisations tend to get it wrong, is they don't articulate it well, that everybody needs to engage in this and be involved in creating the solution, because A, it's the right thing to do, period. it's the right thing to do for society and for human beings, but it's also the best thing to do for the organisation. The organisation will be more successful if it's inclusive. 9 times out of 10 when I'm coaching, I would say that the root issue of the problem that I'm talking about with a client is around the fact that somebody in their organisation has been less than inclusive.
Right.
Now, I don't mean they've been racist or homophobic or ableist. I mean they're just behaving in a way that doesn't engender people coming together and working together.
Yeah.
You know, they're not sharing data. They're sidelining people. They're favouring other people. That isn't inclusive. It doesn't help your organisation. That's where we need to start. Inclusion with a small I.
Okay. So we're not talking about the mischief there. We're actually talking about maybe just not awareness or being self-aware in relation to consequences of actions and about what is and isn't inclusive. Yeah,
and I think if you can understand that, then you can understand the value that the inclusion, the broader inclusion brings. And once you get your head around that, if you haven't already, then shame on you. Then you can start thinking about inclusion on the broader spectrum. You know, the big I in terms of the protected categories.
Yes.
And then you get that right, your diversity almost falls out the back end of it because people want to come and work there.
It's really inclusivity can lead to diversity as opposed to, I know we always have the term diversity and inclusion. In some ways, I've always swapped it around. Is that semantics? But
it's a chicken and egg thing, isn't it?
Yep.
You know, what comes first? Actually, they both need to happen at the same time in reality.
Okay. Yeah. Now, I know we spoke earlier and you talked about that actually there are different contexts. So different countries have different contexts, and I'm assuming different organizations have different context. Different people will have different contexts in relation to what inclusivity and diversity means. Tell us a little bit about that and what you're seeing in the work that you're doing.
Yeah, so I mean, the obvious examples of in terms of diversity and inclusion are around the big campaigns that have reached a tipping point. So like the Me Too movement and in terms of gender equality, the Black Lives Matter movement off the back of George Floyd's murder.
Yes.
Where the majority begin to advocate for the minority is the phrase that I used before. But that does depend on the context, both organisationally and the geography. So you can be a global organisation. You pick any global organisation, truly global organisation, and what matters in North America will be race primarily. Is the pinch point, but in China, it'll be more to do with your socioeconomic background and gender.
Right.
You know, do you come from a city or are you from a rural area? Because you will get discriminated against if you're from a rural area. And so you have to all the time look at the context, whether it's organisationally, you know, or whether it's geographically.
And what are you seeing as good practice? If we let's start with kind of the large multinationals, as you say, who are working across regions, and therefore they've got multiple contexts of this as a challenge. What are you seeing as an example? You don't have to name names, but as an example of people who are getting that right, they're understanding the different spinning plates of context about embracing inclusivity, and they're getting it right. How are they doing that?
So I think it has to come from the top. It has to be, you know, your chief exec, your chairman, chairperson. They have to be the person that is saying, this is happening. We're all involved in this. You know, if it's being driven by your D&I lead, but not really being bought in at the executive level, then that is never going to work. Right. So it has to come from the top, and it has to come from the top in a way that it's really clear what is acceptable. So you know the old phrase of, you know, culture is what you're willing to walk past. And you know, if you're willing to walk past, or as a senior leader, things which are homophobic or which are disparaging towards women or which are racist, then you damn well shouldn't be in the role anyway.
Correct.
But that's the culture you're setting, and so we fall into that conversation of banter. Is it a bit of, oh, well, we're only joking? Well, but what it does, it emboldens people for even worse behaviour further down the organisation. So it has to start at the top. It has to be really clear that everybody is on this journey.
Yep.
This is, I mentioned it before, this is not just for those people from those minority groups to drive. Hey, they've got their own job to do anyway. They got to be getting on with their own job. It's for everybody to drive it on. It's a cultural, organisational wide thing.
Yeah.
You've got to very quickly nip in the bud. Oh, well, it's not fair. I'm being discriminated against. I'm a white middle-class man in my 50s. I'm being discriminated against. It's not fair. Hey, get over yourself. Okay. You've had it bloody good for a long, long time.
Good for a while.
And you know what? You're only going to lose your job if you're mediocre or worse at your job. That's the reality of the only creating a level playing field where there's opportunity for everybody. Only really the ineffectual and incapable people are going to struggle with that.
Okay.
There's plenty of room for people who are good at their roles.
Mark, I'm making notes as we go because I think this is a wonderful conversation. It is something that, as I say, is we're kind of very passionate about here for the Leadership Enigma, using the royal we. One of them I'm hearing is it's about the role of the role model. It's got to start at the top, and it's got to be role modeled at the top. I'm also hearing that it's non-negotiable, and also hearing something that we spoke about earlier, that this is actually everyone's concern. It's the majority, not the responsibility of the minority. Those three things stand out for me. Thoughts on that? Yes. Am I getting that right?
No, you're absolutely getting it right. And there's lots of information out there about the benefit from the organisational benefit of having people with a variety of life experiences coming into your organisation. You're much more likely to be able to service your customer, whether that's internal or external.
Yes.
And the challenge that goes with that diversity is, and that diversity of thought and the diversity of life experience is, things don't always happen quite as quickly. Now you'll innovate more,
yep,
because you've got all these different ideas, but you don't get to a sudden yes, let's do that. Which if everybody came from the same. Yes, exactly. The echo chamber moment where we're all this groupthink. Yeah, great. Yeah. Let's all go. That's quick, but it's not brilliant and it's ineffectual. It's positively disruptive to have a broad range of people in your team, and you therefore need to have an inclusive leader to be able to manage those groups. Because if you've got a leader who can't actually manage a little bit of rub, a little bit of conflict and get agreement, then it's going to feel it's going to feel uncomfortable anyway. But it's not going to be as effective as if you did have somebody who totally gets everybody's got to be heard and manages that situation, and then still ends up being able to make a decision and action off the back of it.
Yeah, I had one guest who said to me that used this phrase, interpersonal comfort trumps organisational change. And I think that's quite a powerful concept in relation to, again, not through mischief, but just not having the courage or the foresight or the awareness to really grasp diversity of thought and to run with it. Mark, I've got to ask
the first. Can I just to finish that, Adam? The first thing that I would say around that is that one of the first things that that they're maybe not ready for it or they need work is they'll say, oh, they're not fit. That new person we hired, they don't fit. They're not a cultural fit.
Right.
And I think you've got to be really careful around that. They're not a cultural fit statement. Now they may be beyond disruptive, but you've got to always step back and look at yourself and look at the organizational culture before you just push from the outset because they don't fit. They were hired because they don't fit. They bring some diversity of thought and life experience. So I think it's an easy option for the mediocre manager to say they don't fit in our culture and exit somebody or make life so uncomfortable that they leave of their own accord. So it's a red flag for me. You've got to watch that they don't fit in the culture.
Well, okay. Well, I think that's an important. I want to kind of continue on that because culture is such an important aspect of the work that we do. I think you do too on in this. You know, we obviously hear culture eats strategy for breakfast, where that is still okay to say that as an old phrase, with Drucker's phrase, exactly. But tell me a little bit more about what you're seeing or the work you're doing as regards that balance of culture, because it is important within organizations, and the inclusivity piece as well, and for leaders to understand how they can marry that together, and you're right, and one not being weaponized against the other.
Yeah, I mean, like I said earlier, you know, inclusion in its broadest sense is a positive golden thread that can run through any culture. You know, you pick up, you know, read any fancy mission and value statement of any organization, and running through the center of that, there should be an element of inclusion.
Right.
The weaponizing thing is an interesting phrase, and I do work with some organizations where it becomes a challenge, but only again where there is a sense of those that have had it easy, those who have been able to be mediocre, feel threatened. I think once you realize actually that it's simply allowing talented people to find a place in an organization and create a more effective, holistic being organization than just a pocket of a few individuals.
In some ways, I editorialize slightly. I didn't know when I used the phrase kind of weaponizing it. And so in some ways, I'm now challenging myself and saying, where did that come from? What am I kind of thinking about? Or what am I drawing from in relation to that? About whether
I can understand why you say that. There are people out there who will, rail against the push on diversity inclusion and saying, I've got capable people in my organization who are leaving because they think they can't get promoted.
Right.
And I can understand, I can conceptualize that as a challenge, but as a leader, you've got to help them see beyond that, and you've also got a responsibility for the company as a whole and the company's long-term lifespan. Yeah.
Well beyond the leader or the people working in the organization at the time. Mark, I need to ask a question. Has the pandemic fueled this debate? Has the pandemic been a catalyst for positive change, or has it been an event that's provided a little bit of both? I don't know. What have you seen the last 22 months?
I think it's a mixed bag.
Right.
I think clearly it's been extremely challenging for the vast majority of the world.
Yes.
I found it hard from a mental well-being point of view. You're stuck in it. It doesn't matter how I am. Don't get me wrong. I'm very privileged. I am in a house, and it's a nice space, and I'm privileged. But it doesn't mean that it isn't hard.
Of course.
I think there has been challenges around it. There has been opportunity that has been missed, I think, to a certain degree, and I'll circle back to that in a second.
Okay.
But to think about some of the positives, there was the ability to work from home. That was always pushed back on as I don't trust. I'm doing my best, privileged white man voice. Given that I am a privileged white man, I don't trust that our workers will be doing what they should be doing from home. In reality, we've seen that people are pretty efficient at home.
Exhausted.
Exhausted. Well, exactly. And when I've tried to switch back to going face to face, suddenly realised that I've got to travel from one place to another. I used to do that quite happily, and there was time for me to think and ponder during those moments.
Yeah.
And you lose that. I think the challenges have been around. Obviously, some of the burden has fallen more on women. You think about traditionally women will look after the house, and watch for the kids. When you were trying to do homeschooling, I know when my kids are school age, crikey, that was tough. That was really, really tough. And if you've got both parents working, that was really, really hard. Burden disproportionately on women there. I think we missed the biggest opportunity, though, I feel, was around disability.
Right.
And perhaps I would say that because I know that world better than most. But for forever, organisations have said that that they've been laggards. I'm going to use the word laggards in terms of how they. Yes, I like that word. How they interact with disabled people, and whether they can bring disabled people into the workplace, and they will lean on old excuses of, well, our infrastructure isn't really fit for purpose.
Right.
We're not sure that all our facilities are accessible. We're not sure that our teams will be able to interact as well with a disabled person, whatever the reason has been. And I think the pandemic gave us an opportunity to suddenly look at a group of people who were discriminated against in terms of coming into the workplace,
right,
because of a creaking infrastructure. It gave us an opportunity to say, you know what, you can work from home. You don't have to worry about how terrible our office is.
Yeah.
We can employ you. And there was a real opportunity, and I'm still keep talking about this now because it's not quite gone, but it wasn't realised because in actual fact, in the UK at least, when the pandemic hit, the first people to get furloughed were those people with disabilities. The first people to lose their jobs were those people with disabilities. So it actually became a reason to offboard those people rather than think, actually, the whole section of society we were nervous about employing because of access. We could have greatly expanded a talent pool.
So that was an opportunity miss, as you say. And so it leads me into a question as people are listening to this, and it's an array. It's people with very small businesses who are entrepreneurial, and hopefully those businesses will go on and do great things, or medium-sized or even super-sized businesses. What really should people be thinking about now as regards to inclusivity, moving forward, learning the lessons from years gone by, but also the pandemic? Is there something that's front of mind for you, Mark, that leaders should have at the front of their mind about taking advantage now of the opportunity ahead?
I think the pandemic's opened up my mind, and hopefully it's opened up others, to consider what do individuals need to be at their best.
Okay.
If I look at the people that I employ, they all need something different to be at their best. And in the past, because we were very much centered around our office working environment, we probably weren't enabling them as well as we might. We've got a huge range of how people choose to work now. And I think if I could suggest one thing, whether you're talking to a single parent, you're talking to somebody who's also a caregiver, you're talking to a disabled person, and you're considering their role, try and understand what would enable them to be at their best, and really be open to some different ways of working. Now, I know that it does obviously create some challenges around that team dynamic. The team dynamic thing has become more challenging. It's harder to get a sense of team when you're not face to face with people. We do understand that, but global teams have been functioning for a long time like that.
Yeah.
So I think that's the key thing that I would say is if you've got a team. Most people only have a certain number of people directly reporting into them. Is how can I enable you to deliver at your best and be flexible to some of the things that come out there? Because for sure, the younger generation are looking at it like that.
Yeah.
The old people like myself in my 50s. We've.
Are we old, Mark? Do we have to? Are we old?
Well, I am.
Well, we're similar age, so we're not.
Come on. I was old from the moment I had my leg amputated. I think I suddenly got very old very quickly.
Right. Well, okay.
I think we've got used to a way of working, and we're trying to adjust. But actually, the generations that are coming through underneath us, they're absolutely, they want a lifestyle. They want to understand how work fits around the lifestyle they want. And I think the senior leaders need to be having those conversations.
This is good advice, but it also requires, doesn't it, more human connection, more time spent really understanding the people that, as you say, report to you, the people who work for you. And that's that, something that I'm passionate about is that human-centered leadership, less of our technical skills, but more about our innate human-centered capabilities to really connect with someone, understand, communicate. How can people get in touch, Marc, learn more, continue the conversation, get you involved? I know you're now with Equiida. So what's the best route to connect?
So you can find me on LinkedIn.
Okay.
It's Marc Woods, Marc with a C. There's not many. There's a few Marc Woodses out there, but not many who've got one leg and used to be a swimmer.
There you go.
So that's one way of doing it. Equiida is spelled EQUIIDA, and
Okay.
there's a website, and you can, if you Google that, we'll come up quite quickly.
Okay, good. Now I'm going to ask another question, which is, it's tagged in, isn't it? Of all the work that you've done, all the people that you've met, all the experiences you've had, is there something that comes to the front of your mind, which is the best piece of leadership advice you've given or received? Now, that might be context driven as well, because it was in the moment, but is there something that jumps to the top of the list for you that you'd like to share? The best piece of leadership advice given or received?
Oh, crikey. Well, I mean, I think, again, context driven, you're right, because I think it depends on the individual, because we all have, like we said before, we all have strengths and weaknesses. We're all, disabled at certain things and less so on others. I think if I think about myself, I still need to daily remind myself I need to listen more.
Okay.
And as a leader, I went through a journey of thinking I knew what success looked like, and being a little bit too draconian and telling people this is what success looks like, and not really listening to the people around me and understanding what their fears were. So that, not creating that psychological safety that we talk about now, of people being able to be open to you and you listening to them and listening to understand rather than listening to respond.
Yep.
Was the big thing for me. And the organisation that I chair now that I mentioned, we talk a lot about leading by listening. We listen to the people that we service, both our members and our employer partners. Listen to them, understand, and help that inform our strategy going forward. So listening would probably be the one that's right at the top. And my experience is the further you go up an organisation, the less they tend to listen, because they feel as though they know it all.
No, it's a great comment. I think listening to understand, as you say, not to respond. As a trial lawyer, I was trained to transmit, not receive. So it's always been a challenge for me as well, which is why I love the podcast, because I get to listen and try and understand. And I hope we've done a little bit of that today as well. Marc, you've been an absolute star. Thank you so much for joining the Leadership Enigma. I know it was only a short chat, but I hope it's been enjoyed by everyone listening to this, and they know how to reach out, connect with you and continue the conversation. But you've been an absolute star. And it's a big thank you from the Leadership Enigma.
It's been a pleasure, and I really don't mind anybody getting in touch. I'm always happy to chat to people and listen to them.
Brilliant. Thank you so much.
Join us again next week for more tips and strategies on the Leadership Enigma. We'd love to hear your comments on today's show, as well as suggestions for future topics and guests. Get in touch with your host on LinkedIn or visit the dedicated website, www.leadersenigma.com, powered by Transform Performance International, where you can access our exclusive learning, including books, videos, bonus content, assessments, and more. Please don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe on all your major podcast platforms. Thanks for listening.